All right, Dad, I know cars have been something that when I was growing up, you always valued and always kept a nice looking car, clean car. But I wanted to talk to you about the change in cars over your lifetime and specifically the technology, because right now you're driving a Tesla Model X, which is an all electric vehicle. What was your first car? And I want you to kind of talk to Ezra about the change that you've seen in your lifetime in cars.
I started out with a 1953 Plymouth flathead 6. I had a paper route. I was 14 years old, and I inherited like 3 or 4 different paper routes from kids that had paper routes, went to high school, graduated, and they gave me their paper route. So I ended up with hundreds of customers. So I had this wagon, and I had a box, a flower box. It was about, 4 feet long. And I would stack papers up in that and carry them. But I couldn't carry them all at one time, so I'd have to carry them, distribute them, come back and get more, come back and get more. So there was this 1953 Plymouth that I bought for like $50. That was not a lot of money, but it was kind of a lot of money for me back then. And it was a stick shift. And I'm sure that people won't understand all of this, especially Ezra. What's a stick shift? It's a gear shifter that you use to drive your car to change the gears, which is now automatic. Everything's automatic now. If you have a clutch and a brake, there's something old about your car, because nowadays they're not even going to have accelerators anymore. So a lot of things are changing. But back then, I had this 4-cylinder gas combustible engine that would get about maybe 50 miles to the gallon. And back then, gas was 15 cents a gallon. So I'd go get 20 cents worth and drive my car around on my paper route. So I didn't spend a whole lot of money on gas. But the car didn't have a floorboard. And I had to put a floorboard in because it had rusted out. Now, you remember I lived in Pennsylvania. It's very cold and snowy, and they put a lot of salt on the road to melt the ice. Well, the salt will also eat through your car metal. So this one had a floorboard problem. So I could drive the car and look down and see the ground moving. So me and my buddy, his name is Gary, he helped me, and we put this floorboard in and fixed it up. We painted it, and, it was a half-decent looking car. I think I sold it for $100. This is the story of my life, selling cars. I started out with $50, sold it, got $100, bought a 1953 Chevrolet, and then I bought a 55, and I kept making money every time. So this carried on till I went in the military. So I had an old car, and I sold it, and I sold another one, I sold another one. Pretty soon I was driving a sports car. This was in Germany in 1979. So from 1962 to 1979, I bought every car that I owned, and I never paid any payments on a car. And I did it all through this, just buying a car, fixing it up, cleaning it. Sometimes all I did was just clean it, and I'd sell it for a lot more than what I paid for it. So that's the story of my life. But this 53 Plymouth was kind of, my favorite car because I was 14 years old. I didn't even have a driver's license. So I would go out 4 o'clock in the morning and drive this car because I had to go to school. So I was done by 6, so nobody was on the road. They never saw me. So I drove that till I got a license. I got a license when I was 16. I got a learner's permit at 15, license 16. But this car wasn't the prettiest, and it burned oil, and the engine had 90,000 miles on it, but it ran. And me and my buddy used to work on it. We did all kind of stuff to it, but because it was so simple back in those days. I had a carburetor, 4 cylinders with 4 spark plugs, and you change the oil, and as long as the oil was clean, your car's keeping on running, especially Plymouths and Chryslers and Buicks and those older cars. They really ran pretty good. But anyway, I even drove this car to school and parked it, and I hid it because playing sports, I didn't get out of school until like 6 o'clock in the evening because of practice. So nobody even knew I had this car. So I hid it in the woods and I would go get it and then drive it from there. And it didn't even have license plates on it. So I took a lot of chances with this car, but it was my first car. So it was better than a bike because I used to have a bike before that, and I went everywhere on that bike, but then I started using that car. Got a little bit lazy. And it was cheap because I didn't have to spend too much money on it. So once I started using this car, I saw the value of just keeping it clean and taking care of the engine and changing the oil and making sure the spark plugs were clean and those kinds of things. And I did that early. Nobody taught me how to do it. I just did it. And I used to get this magazine, I think it was called Popular Mechanics. And it, even back then, I used to read them all the time, and it would show cars of the future. I'll never forget this. They had a car that had a table in it, and there was no steering wheel, there was no brakes. People would just get in, you tell the car where to go, and they would sit there and play cards while their car was driving. And I said, man, I can't wait. And they said by the year 2000, they would have those cars, right? So that didn't happen in 2000, because 2000 I had a Volvo. Almost had a Volvo every year, but I remember that very vividly about how I wanted a car that drove itself. So throughout all of these years, all the cars I went through, and I think I had like 10 Volvos, who knows how many I had, but had lots of Volvos, and I was always about safety, and I could sell them for more than what I paid for sometimes. This is before we went to Spain. You were like, I don't know, 2 years old, because that's when we had the talking car. You don't remember, but I used to tell you stories about this, about how the car would say, left door is open or right door is open. You were 2 years old. You were just beginning to talk, and you were saying exactly what the car was saying. So if the car said, the left door is open, you would be in your car seat saying, the left door is open, and the right door is open. Your headlights are on. You would say this at 2 years old. But this car was after I got a Volvo, and I sold it. It was a two-door coupe. I can't remember. It was the last one they made like this. It was a two-door. It was really nice. And we had it at Mather, but you were very uncomfortable in this car. So we bought that other car. I can't even think of the name of it. Japanese car. But we bought that car because it was four-door and it was easy for your brother to get in and out, where I wanted to keep my Volvo. But I sold the Volvo for a profit and bought this other car, and we went to Spain with that one. But it was a Nissan. And that was probably the first Japanese car I had, and then I bought Toyotas after that. And I had a Toyota in Germany where I bought it from this doctor, and it was green, two-door, really nice. And I sold it for a profit, and that's when I bought the English sports car. It was called the Wedge. I can't remember the make, but it was the Wedge. And it was green and had racing stripes, and, it was really nice. And I think I sold that when I did sell it, and I bought a Volvo. You may remember that. That's the one we had in San Bernardino. It was blue. And everybody used to say how pretty this car was, and I hated that color. It was the color your mother picked out. It was really bright blue, but everybody liked that color. I didn't like it. I'm kind of the plain Jane kind of guy. In fact, my 53 Plymouth, we painted it gray. And back in those days, people were driving yellow cars and orange cars and purple cars. My car was gray. But I didn't want anybody to see it anyway, so probably nobody noticed it anyway because it was ugly to them, but it wasn't ugly to me. But that was the beginning of me getting cars and understanding the value and, taking care of them. Again, nobody told me that. The people that raised me had a I think it was a Chrysler, I'm not sure, but it had a push button, and they wouldn't let me drive it until I was about 17, because they had to go somewhere and they needed me to drive, but it wasn't just for me to drive, but it had push buttons. And back in those days, to have a shifter on the column, because they had shifters on the floor, but I had a shifter on the column where you'd shift a 1, 2, and 3. And you have to push in the clutch and you can go. But this car that they had this dynamic flow transmission, and you just pressed the button, and that was the latest thing out. You pressed the button and, the car would go into gear. So you could put it in drive and then you just go. So back in those days, they didn't have many of those type because everything was a shifter. You had to shift the gears. So you had to learn how to drive with a clutch and a brake and a gas pedal. So I go through all of that, get through my Volvos, Audis. I hate BMWs. Never got a BMW. Austin loves BMWs. Austin is your uncle, of course. So Audi, BMWs, and, well, not BMWs, but Volvos were kind of the car that I bought from the time that I got in the military, and found that those cars were more value. They kept their value longer, American cars. So that's how I started, and the Volvo was a safe car. So that's why I went to the European cars. So I went through the European cars. And then one day, you start telling me about a Toyota that was electric. And I'm like, this kid's crazy. He's always talking about these crazy things. And so I didn't pay much attention to it, but you just kept on talking about it. And we needed to buy one of those cars. We needed to get one of those kind of cars. And so once I started looking into it, and you know what that was, the Prius. And so, it's like, okay, we could try a electric car. It wasn't all electric, it was just partial electric, but it did save gas, and it wasn't the prettiest car on the road, but it was clean, and I could sell it for a profit, or pretty much the way I paid for it. So we bought that Prius. I think we gave that Prius to you. I can't remember. Do you remember? So I think that may have been your first Prius. But did we buy that in Hawaii? Yeah. So then I went back to Volvos. But that was a pretty good car, actually. And it was very economical. So that was the beginning of the electric stage, and me beginning to think about what gas cost and all of this stuff about electric cars. But you were the first one that planted that seed in my head. So now, after we own that Prius, that wasn't so bad. So the next thing I know, you're talking about this Tesla. I thought Elon Musk was an idiot. This guy, he doesn't talk very well, and he tries to dance. He has no movement. He's the most cumbersome looking guy I've ever seen trying to dance. Puts on cowboy hats now and big glasses and wears boots, and he still looks like an idiot. But the guy is super smart. So you start telling me about Tesla. We finally bought a Tesla. So then I guess my first Tesla was that Model X. And at first, I really didn't, it was different. And I didn't like it. It was okay. But I love my Volvos and my Mercedes and my Audis. But once I got that Tesla, and you begin to see the value of, the speed, the visibility of it. I mean, the appearance is very good. The electricity that you use is very limited. You don't pay a lot of money. The car is fast, and everybody wanted one. So I began to like the Tesla now. But I still like my Volvos. And as you know, now Volvo has an all-electric car. And if I didn't have this Tesla, that's probably what I would buy. But electric now is the way things are. And, it has one pedal, no clutch. You don't shift the gears. In fact, it doesn't even have a transmission. The 53 Plymouth that I had a transmission. That's what you shifted when you shifted the gears. Very cumbersome, and You could have lots of problems with them. Teslas don't have that kind of problem. So once I migrated to electric car, I've kind of given up on combustible engine cars. I think they're polluting the planet, just like Elon Musk said. We're running out of resources. Oil is going to not last forever. So they're going to have to find an alternative. But mostly it screws up the planet, the air. So when Ezra grows up, hopefully everybody will be driving everything but combustible engine cars. They'll probably be in museums, and people will wonder what it was like to drive a gas car. So Ezra might be in that situation by the time he grows up. But probably by 2030, there'll be 80% of electric cars, 2035, something like that. That's the way they're going. And so now I drive another Model X, and his grandmother has a Model Y, and so we're completely electric. So all the way from a 1953 Plymouth through tons of cars. I don't even want to talk about all the cars I had because I've had so many. But I probably had more Volvos than any other car. But that seemed to be the most reliable car on the market, and it's safe, and the resale value is very high. So with Tesla, that was the other reason that I went with Tesla, because the resale value is very high. But the same year, I don't know if I talked to you about this, but you could buy a brand new Cadillac and cost you almost the same amount as a Tesla. Within 3 to 5 years, that car is worth maybe $12,000, $16,000 at the most, and the Tesla's at $78,000 or $80,000. When you've paid $100,000 for the car, why would I buy a car and in 5 years it's worth $16,000 or $20,000 if you kept it up? You didn't put a lot of mileage on it, but most people beat up their cars, and so you don't get a lot of money back. So the Tesla was the way to go for me, because of the value and the technology and how everything is now. Soon, going back to my Mechanics Illustrated magazine, there'll be no gas pedal. You'll just have a brake. And even Volkswagen doesn't even have a steering wheel. They're working on that already. So by the time Ezra's driving, he probably gets in the car, programs it, tells it where to go, and it'll take him right to where he wants to go. And he'll be playing cards on a table in his car while it's on the way to his destination. Something I saw when I was like 12 years old.